Hello everybody. If you're not into your Porsches, the 911 model lineup can seem overly complicated. But for those in the know, every now and again, a new variant comes along that seems to add something genuinely new. A decade and a half ago, this was the Carrera GTS. Then in 2017, the Carrera T promised to add something worthwhile to the lineup. But after a burst of initial excitement, the car seemed to be almost instantly forgotten, with the shelves full of them struggling to find a buyer at a time when people were going 911 crazy. So I'm here to ask, what exactly is a Carrera T? What went wrong? And does this car deserve the praise that many feel it should have? This should be good. For those not familiar with the 911 lineup, allow me to explain it in brief. At the bottom you have the Carrera, above that the Carrera S, then the Carrera GTS. At the top of the range you have the luxury orientated 911 Turbo and also the race inspired 911 GT3. The aim of the Carrera T was to provide more of the driver focused thrills people talk about with the GT cars, but at a much more affordable price. Even if you were lucky enough to be able to buy a GT3 of this generation brand new, it would have set you back over £120,000. The Carrera T was at almost the opposite end of the spectrum, placed between the Carrera and Carrera S and priced at around £85,000 from new. The idea with this was to improve performance the old-fashioned way, not by adding, but taking away. The Carrera T then is as much about what you don't get as what you do. Mechanically, the car is based on the 911 Carrera and shares its 370 horsepower 3-litre twin-turbo flat-six, with its smaller turbochargers versus the Carrera S, which Porsche say should spool up a little quicker and are therefore more suited to a driver-orientated car. Inside, by default, you got no rear seats, no air conditioning, no stereo, and you also got thinner glass here and here. The total weight saving is only 20 kilos compared with a regular equivalent specified Carrera. That doesn't sound like a particularly impressive weight saving for a car that no longer even has proper door handles. However, there is a method to this madness because it's the same tactic Porsche used 30 years ago to create the iconic 968 Club Sport, and that was a hit. The formula was much the same. Take your decent base car, in this case the 911 Carrera, strip out some of the luxuries, give it a lower, sportier suspension setup, and charge less. However, that's the bit I think Porsche got wrong. Your 968 Club Sport did well because it was a less car for less money, about £5,000 30 years ago. This has, in theory, less, but is £7.5 grand more than a regular Carrera. Even worse than that, most of the stuff Porsche stripped out, you can actually option back in. So this car, which is the original 911 Carrera T demo from 4 years ago, has a Bose stereo. It has the Porsche navigation in it. It even has rear axle steer, which doesn't seem very back to basics driving purity to me. It has posh LED headlights up the front, and in Porsche tradition, it has the Carrera T interior pack. I don't know why Porsche insist on doing this. You buy a Carrera GTS, you have to specify the GTS interior. Buy a Carrera T, you have to specify the Carrera T interior. Nearly £2,000 for that. Why is that not standard? I do not know. Even worse, had you specified privacy glass on this car, it wasn't actually the thinner, lightweight stuff, meaning you were essentially paying an extra £7,500 for the stickers? For me, Porsche made a fundamental misstep with the way they packaged and sold this car. They got the basics absolutely right, performance through lightweight, but I think they could have taken it a little bit further, given the car a GT3 RS style carbon bonnet, maybe the 6-speed lightweight GT3 gearbox. A PDK should always be an option for a car like this because there are people out there who simply cannot drive a manual. So I don't think that is an issue. But they shouldn't have let people option stuff like rear axle steer or the posh LED headlights. You should have been able to choose only about 5 different things for this car. No, you can't put the rear seats back in, but you can have air conditioning back in, you can have a stereo, that sort of stuff. Keep it simple. Give people only 5 or 6 color options. Maybe give it a slightly spicier tune for the engine, so it's got better performance than, say, a Carrera S, but is priced about the same. However, by not letting people option it with luxurious things, that'll keep away most of your average 911 buyers who do want those luxury items. By doing that, you will genuinely have done what I think Porsche set out to do: give people a driver-focused car at a much more affordable price. However, as it is, it's a rather confused cookie. Simply put, I don't think people really knew what the Carrera T was meant to be. And for that reason, amongst others I'm sure, when a GT3 was trading for considerably over list, as was the Cayman GT4, the Carrera T, a supposed limited run car, was sat in dealers at list price, going nowhere in great quantity. However, 4 years later, and there is a reason why Porsche GB still have one of their original demonstrators. No, it's not because they can't sell it, it's because they say they don't really want to, because they're rather attached to it. And there are many out there who believe that the Carrera T is actually one of the greatest of the last generation 911. Let's see then if they're onto something. In an ideal world, I would have been able to drive this car back to back with a regular 911 991.2 Carrera or Carrera S to see how the T truly differentiates itself. When I picked this car up, Porsche told me there were in fact a lot of changes they made to this car that they simply never publicized. Like, for example, with this 7-speed manual, for the first time it will default to the plane between 3rd and 4th rather than 5th and 6th, which I think is simply sensible. But beyond that, I did struggle to find any information out there as to exactly what it is Porsche have done. However, I did get the opportunity on the day I collected this to drive a 992 Targa 4 GTS. Though, yes, I will admit that is one of the less dynamically competent 911s. I've driven a lot of 992s recently, and that told me one really crucial thing. In terms of the core principles of 911, the key tenets that make Germany's favourite sports car so well renowned the world over, the 991.2 Carrera T absolutely nails it. The difference between this and a 992 is staggering. They don't simply feel like different generations of the same car, they feel like entirely different model lines. I believe it is no exaggeration to say that the 992 drives more like an R8 than it does this. In fairness, when the 991 came out in 2013, it was already surrounded by controversy. The 997 had been generally very well received after the somewhat unloved 996, but this seemed to do a few things that really upset the purists. It became notably larger than the outgoing car. The wheelbase was increased by nearly 4 inches, the track widened by a couple, and the car did look considerably porkier than any other porker before it. Even worse than that, out went hydraulic steering and in came electric. And I'll be honest, in the first generation 991, it is a real weakness. Simply not good enough in a sports car of any description, especially not in one so fabled for the way it feels. The second generation of 991 seemed to be even more controversial because Porsche announced they would no longer make a naturally aspirated Carrera. All of the base 911 range would then be turbocharged, and yes, sure, they would be much quicker, but like the M3 before it, people worried if the cars would lose their character, lose their 911-ness. After all, a screaming flat 6 soundtrack is a core part of what makes these cars. For me, the engine is certainly one of the lowlights of this package. You would imagine that with only 370 horsepower from a 3-litre twin turbocharged 6, it would at least respond well. But below about 3000 RPM, it is rather laggy, and even over that, you're always acutely aware that this is a turbocharged lump. When BMW were getting 425 horsepower from even the earliest of their M3s, which had the same number of cylinders and the same displacement, you can't help but wonder exactly what it is Porsche were doing. You do always have this sensation that this is an engine very much held back in software, and this was borne out by Litchfield, who when they remap these can get you a triple-digit power increase. They can take them to about 500 horses with no modifications really of note. Truthfully, the best engine for this car, one that would have made it spectacular, is the 4-litre lump from the Boxster GTS 4.0. However, the simple fact is, that was not available when this car was in production. This being said, once you get to about 3,000 RPM, the car pulls strongly. It has good clean power all the way to the 7 and a bit thousand RPM red line, and it does at least feel a little bit naturally aspirated in its power delivery, if not its response. Beyond that though, and there is so very much to love about this car. The engine may not be my favourite, but this gearbox is amazing. I can't remember if I've actually driven a 911 with the 7-speed manual in it. I've driven lots of manual 911s, loads of PDKs, and I have driven 7-speed manual cars before, but whether I've done a 911, I honestly cannot remember. Most journalists, of course, will tell you this is nowhere near as good as the 6-speed that you get in the Boxster or in the 911 GT3. Honestly though, this is sensational. I do believe the lever is a little bit shorter in the T than in other cars, but it's perfect, whatever they've done. The throw is short, quite weighty, very notchy and incredibly satisfying. It also has a clever little mechanism in here, meaning you can only go into 7th if you're already in 5th or 6th. So for normal driving on country lanes, you don't even think about the extra ratio. It just behaves as you'd expect it to. The clutch is nice and light, easy to operate. If you have the drivetrain in Sport or Sport Plus mode, you'll also get automatic rev matching. This car does have the Sport Chrono Pack, but it's here in a special weight-optimized version for the Carrera T. In truth, by weight optimized, I think they mean they didn't bother putting the stopwatch on the dash, which is a shame because useless though it may be to most people, it does look nice. And when you've taken that away, you have to ask yourself, what is the Sport Chrono Pack really doing that I should be paying for? I don't think that much. They say weight optimized, and all I can really hear is cost optimized. And then we come to one of the most important bits of any 911, the steering. I love it. I absolutely love it. Is it quite as good as in the 997 or an old air-cooled 911? No, not quite. Is it better than in the 992? Yeah, by a country mile. Also better than the early 991 as well. It has that characteristic 911 lightness to it. You begin to pick up the speed, you can feel the weight transfer to the rear of the car, and the chassis as well as the steering really do talk to you. As ever with any modern 911, it's the front end you really need to watch for, because that is what's going to wash wide first. The rear, you honestly don't need to worry about. If you manage to unstick that, good luck to you, because you're in big trouble. The main thing the wheel lacks over earlier 911s is the feedback, that writhing in your hand sensation you get with them. But it's still very, very good. Torque from the engine isn't amazing. 335 pound-feet, 450 newton-meters. That's not a lot when you consider what it is. You could tell Porsche were trying very hard to maintain the model hierarchy by pegging this back. This car also has the final drive from a Carrera S, meaning the gear ratios are ever so slightly shorter. That does fix one of the key criticisms of many 911, overly long gearing. When you've got a gearbox as good as this, the opportunity to change ratio all that more often is only ever a good thing. It doesn't take long to really get into a rhythm with this car, and you can carry some serious pace. Despite the fact it is a lot bigger than a 997, it doesn't feel dramatically more daunting to place, unlike the 992, which feels very broad-shouldered. You've still got just a little hint of that classic 911 headlights proud profile at the front. For the most part, I've been driving this car in individual mode, and I have it configured with the powertrain in normal, because I like to rev match and heel and toe myself. It is very good for doing that. The chassis is also in normal, we'll get onto that in a moment. Start-stop is turned off, and I've even got it set so that the wing will just do its normal thing. You can operate it manually with the button here, and I do that on occasion, but I actually like the look of this car with the wing down, and it is a great looking car, particularly in this racing yellow, which is one of the free colours for it. The interior I also love. It's simple, it's focused. No, it's not particularly flashy, and I think Porsche really do need to do something with the 911's interior that wasn't what they did with the 992. BMW are catching up fast, and the M3 now does feel in some ways like the nicer car to sit in. And that's not right. There are parking sensors front and rear with a camera at the back, so placing this car in town is pretty easy. In truth, it's there where I really feel the rear axle steer. Out on the road, I can't really sense it doing all that much, which means only one of two things. Either it isn't doing all that much, or it's doing things in a way you simply don't notice. The suspension is an area I would give this car a little bit of criticism. This has a 20mm lower PASM setup. That's Porsche's adaptive suspension. You couldn't get that particular setup with the regular Carrera. This was a Carrera T thing. However, like many of the modern 911s, what is normal mode for Porsche, I think should be considered sport mode for British roads. If you do put it into its sport chassis setting, it is ridiculously bumpy. It's just unpleasant. That for me is a track only setting. Time then, I suppose, to talk about the brakes, because they are by far the biggest single option on this car. It's been fitted with the Porsche ceramic items, and they're notable for a few reasons. First, I can't recall ever seeing discs with quite so little clearance between the pad and the bell. It's ridiculous. On most of the Ferraris now, it seems like there's a good half an inch or so where the disc isn't really being used. On this, it's about £0.5 They were also very expensive, just over £6,000, helping take the on-the-road price of this car to 17 quid below 100 grand. All of a sudden, it doesn't sound a lot like a 911 for the common man anymore, does it? At lower speeds, the ceramics can be a touch grabby. However, over the last couple of days, I have adapted to them, and they have immense stopping power. I also do approve because, though they are pricey, they also reduce unsprung mass, and that's something I think does fit with the ethos of a lightweight, driver-focused car. It's here where that rear steer is really going to come into play. That turning circle is ridiculously good. Here we go. Today, it would appear you can pick up a good example of a Carrera T for around £75,000 to £80,000. So it seems to be one of very few cars that's actually obeyed the depreciation curve it was supposed to take. Conclusion time then, is the Carrera T worth your money? Tricky question, and one I have to answer in two parts. Firstly, did Porsche do enough to justify the name tag on the car? I'm not sure that they did. They got halfway there and they did a lot right, but as I mentioned in the intro, I think they screwed up with then allowing people to essentially undo all of the work, and that just made no sense whatsoever. If you want a luxury 911, go and buy a Carrera S. However, do I feel like there's anything fundamentally wrong with this package? Well, not really. It looks great. It goes well, the interior works, the seating position is perfect, it feels and drives like a 911 should. It's even pretty decent on fuel. When you're having fun, it will be somewhere in the teens, but on the motorway, you can get over 30 to the gallon very easily. That 7th gear evidently does work. Storage space up front is good for a 911 because you don't have back seats. You've also got some there as well. The only things really annoying me with this particular car are the amount of noises it's making, and they're very un-Porsche-like. This door is rattling. This rearview mirror up here has a rattle in it. Something over here is rattling too. Though if it's the cup holders, I'm going to forgive them entirely. I love the cup holders in these older cars. They're amazing. This car is also making a very worrying noise coming from the offside rear. With the window down, it sounds like it's dragging a set of keys. If I give this back to Porsche and they tell me there's absolutely nothing wrong with the suspension, I will eat my hat. But this, I don't think is quite right. In any case, it hasn't really affected my enjoyment of the car, and I'm sure they'll be able to fix it, so I'm not going to mark it down for that. And ultimately, as you no longer really seem to be paying a premium for the T, I cannot really give you any good reason as to why you shouldn't buy it. I think it's fab. As ever, a big thank you to Porsche GB for lending me another one of their cars. To you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment down below and hit the subscribe button. And don't forget, press that bell icon. That way you'll be notified of every single new release. If you've already subscribed, check that active. If you think you've missed videos from me, that may be why. As ever, I shall see you all for the next one. Bye-bye.